Dr. Jake Lane. You've already heard from, but Jacob is Materials Research and Knowledge Manager at the mattress manufacturer Silent Night. His role covers sustainability, regulatory compliance and beyond. He's got a PhD in chemistry, and much of his work involves understanding the impact of different chemical flame retardants have on the environment, circularity and smoke toxicity.
So I'm going to talk about chemical transparency and how we can potentially harness that to aid the elimination of problematic flame retardants. So in this, what we will be covering is, why do we need chemical transparency in the first place? I think I'm talking to a room of people that agree that we already need it, so we shouldn't need to stay there too long. What the chemical labelling requirement is in the proposed furniture and furnishings fire safety regulations 20XX. Maybe I was a little bit ambitious with putting it as 20. Current chemical legislation, proposed chemical legislation, and then just highlighting that we all need to be conscious actors, so there are limitations to chemical legislation. So if we go back to why do we need chemical legislation, it all starts with regrettable substitution. So the chemical on the left is decabromodiphenyl ether. It was shown to be a persistent organic pollutant, and overnight the chemical flame retardant industry moved us over to decabromodiphenyl ethane. As I showed in Richard's slides, it's these brominated bonds that are the bits that cause the persistence, bioaccumulation and toxicity. So what happens is we move from one to the other and still get these effects ongoing in the environment. When the pop of decabromodiphenyl ether got banned, there was a slight lull, and then we started seeing that it was turning up in waste streams, and it's commonly been used in furniture, particularly in the back coating of fabrics for the upholstered seating. So in 2022, the UK government posted their guidance on the management of waste upholstered domestic seating, or WUDs, and they said that from now on you can no longer send or try and recycle any form of mattress or any form of sofa or domestic seating. It has to go, that's been upholstered, it has to go instead go for incineration. So all of a sudden any potential circular economy around this has gone. The other reason why we need chemical transparency is down to when we mix chemical flame retardants, we actually can see a decrease in fire safety. So the current regulations in their present form, every single component has to go through, or has to have its own test and prove conformity. But when we put them together, what we actually see is that whilst you might get a reduction in the heat release and ignition, you get an increase in the smoke toxicity. And this needs to, again, this needs to change, and that's what's been proposed in the furniture fire current changes to the regulations, is that we move away from a component test to representative finished product testing. So we should, in theory, see this move, but we still need to think about what chemical flame retardants, if we have to use them in order to meet compliance, we are going to be using. So chemical transparency will allow informed choices to be made throughout the supply chain and throughout the product's lifetime, from inception of the from your furniture's design all the way through to recyclers and how they can best find the waste stream that is the best option for that product and or even at that component level. So the current chemical labelling requirement of the furniture of the proposed regulations is, when it comes into effect, is in sections E and F. So in section E, they're saying that if the product contains a chemical flame retardant, you must use the wording, this product contains a chemical flame retardant to meet the requirements of the Furniture and Furnishings Fire Safety Regulations 20XX. And then you must list those chemical flame retardants. But what level do we need to list of detail does that list go into? And that's something we don't yet know and are seeking clarity on. So it could just be the flame retardant formulation name. And I've chosen here Firemaster 550 because despite it's no longer being used, it's a very well studied flame retardant formulation. And the reason why it isn't very well studied, or the reason why it's so well studied, is because it's shown to have these 4 active fire retardant ingredients. The reason why it is banned is because these 2 are now regulated in the EU. So basically there's been this root and branch shift away from using Firemaster 550. And if we just put Firemaster 550 on that label, it's not going to allow products a few years down the line to actually be recognized that it contains these harmful chemicals, which is important. So the MBF guidance on mattresses, as they last 7 to 10 years. The MBF, sorry, for those that aren't in the know, is the National Bed Federation, which is a trade organisation here in the UK. So what current chemical legislation is already out there? In the UK, we have 9 different forms of chemical legislation, but the 2 that I want to focus on is the Biocidal Products Regulation, or BPR, which actually has a consumer-facing side to it. So if ever you put any biocide on your product in the UK, you have to list that active ingredient that is present on that product and any side effect that comes with it. That enables the consumer to make an informed choice about what they are bringing into their home and what they are exposing their loved ones and even their pets to. And the other one is REACH. I've purposely just said REACH here because we often talk about the UK, including Northern Ireland, and Northern Ireland uses both UK REACH and EU REACH. Manufacturers and importers have to declare a substance in a product that appears on the SVHC candidate list of REACH, notifying consumers if the presence in that product exceeds 0.1% weight by weight, and provide instructions on safe use of that product. UK REACH, when we left Europe, just did a carbon copy of EU REACH, and then has subsequently had no alterations or additions in chemicals that are moving on to that SVHC list. What they are currently doing is they've now realised that they can't just continue keeping their heads in the sand. EU REACH has moved on, so they're holding a public consultation on UK REACH, which closes on the 11th of July, as trying to find an alternative transitional registration model. Effectively, what this means is what they're proposing is that they will be able to access other REACH databases and use their chemical technical files to make an informed decision as to whether or not we should then implement or move those chemicals onto the SVHC candidate lists, or anything else needs doing to them. But they're allowing certain cases to be put forward for if that chemical has a specific use that is important to UK industry. If you feel that you have a strong view on it, I would recommend that you use the link there to enter into the consultation and have your say. So because of that wanting to copy other countries' regulatory strategies, I think it's really important to talk about ECHA, the European Chemical Agency, and their regulatory strategy for chemical flame retardants, which was published in March 2023. So when ECHA regulate, they do this based on the hazard properties of a chemical, so things such as its persistence, its bioaccumulation, its mobility, and its carcinogenicity. Due to that story of regrettable substitution, they've realized that they want to try and treat chemicals at a higher level of that, rather than just looking at individual chemicals, and maybe start to look at families instead. So if we look at different flame retardant families, what they said is there's no compatible level of just blanket banning all brominated, chlorinated organophosphates for any flame retardant. So they needed to start going into subcategories or flame retardant groups. And actually they saw, when we start going into those groups, we see that there is a much higher likelihood that they will start regulating at this level. And I've just highlighted here flame retardant groups that are present within or can be used within furniture. So we automatically see that brominated flame retardants, when we go down to the flame retardant group level of aromatic and aliphatic, there's a high likelihood that they will meet some form of regulation at some point this year within Europe. But it's less likely for chlorinated. There is some organophosphorus. And then generally with other flame retardants, we're seeing, such as inorganic phosphates and phosphorus, that is very unlikely. And for the nitrogen containing FRs and other inorganics, we still can't look at it at that level. So we need to go further still. And then we can start to determine whether or not chemicals would be safe, or will they be regulated. One thing that this neglects is it neglects the flame retardant performance, the effect on smoke toxicity, the effect on the mechanical and physical properties of the product or the component that that flame retardant is then being put into, and some wider environmental considerations as well. And as we've mentioned previously with Richard's talk, that effect on the circular economy and circularity. So one of the key considerations in that limitation of legislation, I really like this. This is is when we look at those wider environmental considerations. I really like this graphic from the Stockholm Resilience Centre with its 9 areas that of safe operating space, and flame retardants come into 2 key areas here. They come in terms of novel entities, and we see that we're exceeding that safe operating space. Novel entities are chemicals that last for a long time in the environment, and we've talked again and again today about how flame retardants are these persistent, often seen as POPs. They have this bioaccumulating effect. They have a negative effect on the environment. The other one to consider is biogeochemical flows. So a lot of flame retardants contain phosphorus or nitrogen, and we again are exceeding that safe operating space. So we need to start thinking more about how we can make safe products without using these chemical flame retardants. Secondly, it is that recycled content, so containing unwanted chemicals. We're already seeing in recycled and reused food vessels that there is a vector for toxins to enter into the human body. And there is a risk with recycling of mattress products into of mattress recycler and furniture recycler into other product that we're going to get inadvertent chemicals transfer. So what we have in this picture here is shoddy, which is a form of recycling. So basically, when fabrics come to an end of life, they go back to a manufacturer and they can get ripped up and fiberized and then baked with a binder. We then buy that and we can use that as a spring insulator pad to protect the other materials in the mattress from the sharp edges of the spring.
Jake, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up. Sorry to interrupt you. Just
That's
in
quite
terms
all right.
of time.
Yeah, and the danger there is that accidentally chemical flame retardants get into this and onto the others. So my conclusions are that in the same way that ingredient and nutritional labeling has empowered a healthy consumer, chemical transparency and labeling can empower conscious actors throughout a product's lifetime. The chemical labeling proposed within the furniture fire regulations consultation facilitates greater transparency, but it needs to be at the level of active ingredient labeling to avoid a repeat of the waste upholstered domestic seating that we've seen. Legislation is helpful, but supply chains need to be responsible actors when considering wider unregulated environmental considerations, and components with recycled content is going to be a hotspot due to the presence of legacy flame retardants. There's a couple of links just there, and the last one is just, I haven't covered, but that's just saying that the Royal Society of Chemistry actually has a campaign saying that there needs to be greater control of chemicals, and in order to do that we need a national chemical agency in the UK, and they're calling for government to actually implement that at the moment. And that's me, so thank you.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Can we give a virtual round of applause to both our speakers? That was really fascinating.